Thank David Plank, not only for organizing this and getting it to happen, but co-authoring this paper with me. So these ideas represent both of us, unless there's some that he doesn't like, and then he can disassociate himself from them later. But we had a lot of fun thinking ahead about the question of what would continuous improvement look like in California with all of the change that you've already heard about. It is an exciting time in California. I feel like maybe for the first time in about 20 years, we're aligning accountability to education rather than trying to align education to accountability. And there's an exciting set of things happening, which, as I think Janelle said, include almost all the parts of the system. So we have a lot of opportunity. At the same time, and someone alluded to this also, there's quite a robust set of conversations going on in Washington right now, and in the next 2 months, we could end up with a new ESEA. And the general direction of those conversations, initiated by the Republicans in the Senate and the House, has been to allow states to make more judgments about how they will structure their accountability systems. And there's a lot of wrangling going on. As one might imagine. Most of the conversation, when you get it out of the sort of Politico and the blogs and so on, has been arguments about testing, how often and what consequences. But some of us who've been working in Washington for a while have also shoved a few other things onto the agenda, many of them coming from the work that's going on in California, including issues like resource equity and what we are beginning to call resource accountability. Things like capacity building and continuous improvement. And the idea that maybe accountability does not equal testing, nor does it equal consequences. But in fact, accountability should be a strategy to get good schools for all kids. And testing may play a role in that, but a lot of other things have to happen if at the other end of accountability, you actually get good schools for all kids. And Dave Conley referenced the notion, I guess I should get my little slides up here. If I do this, it works. That we have different theories of reform operating. And I think of the contention right now in images of accountability systems as being very much like what people in business schools talk about theory X and theory Y. Theory X is generally considered to be the discounted theory of organizational management, which assumes that people are motivated only by carrots and sticks, by extrinsic rewards and punishments, and that one ought to identify what's going to happen from the top of the system and push it down through a set of mandates. It also includes what I call the fallacy of hierarchical intelligence, which is the idea that whatever is the top level of the system knows more than all of the levels below it, and the people at the bottom know nothing. And I think there's a lot of federal policy that has been created on that theory in recent years. Now, as Dave already pointed out, it assumes that you have the capacity and the will to do things. It also assumes that the decision makers at the top have all the right ideas and know everything that is needed to prescribe in detail what would happen at the bottom. And as people have learned in the business sector in terms of management, it actually is not ultimately very effective for reasons of capacity, for reasons of will, and for reasons of the fact that actually at the level of solving problems, you often have to do something that's not standardized. It's not the same for everyone. The theory Y that is often credited to Deming and others who worked with Japanese companies when they invented quality circles and all of that kind of thing, which made its way back over the ocean because nobody would listen to Deming on this side of the ocean when he first thought of it, leads us to the notion that, in fact, what drives continuous improvement and better outcomes is local energy and buy-in, coupled with information about how things are going, coupled with capacity, that is knowledge and skill. So you're always growing the knowledge and skill of people. You're giving them information, which is a form of an incentive. You're incorporating energy, a little bit of pressure and support, top-down support for bottom-up reform. And I think that's what we're trying to develop here in California, is really a theory-wide that will replace the test and punish approach with an approach that is about assess and improve. Let's take stock, let's have information, let's build people's capacity, and let's improve. So how will we do that? That's the question. So if we could characterize our accountability approach at this juncture, we might think of it as having 3 elements. First of all, we're trying to shift our focus to meaningful learning. And in California, that's happening through the new standards, Common Core State Standards, Next Generation Science Standards, and new assessments that are hopefully, that are intended to and hopefully will be able to measure deeper learning, higher order thinking skills, and so on. It's also being activated by programs like Linked Learning, which are trying to connect the in-school experience to what happens out of school, and a variety of other kind of initiatives that are happening both state and at the local level to make learning engaging, exciting, meaningful, and actually productive of college and career readiness. The second leg of that stool, resource accountability, is the innovation of the local control funding formula, much more equitable, money following the child, the local control accountability plans, which say we'll hold ourselves accountable for how we spend this money by both being transparent about what we're doing and why we're doing it and what our goals are, and putting that in a system, which is creating this kind of local energy around thinking things through, coupling it with information, and we hope developing capacity, knowledge, and skill. And that's the third leg of the triangle, which is professional capacity building, because the whole theory falls down, whether you're thinking of the notion of kind of developing the local control accountability plans, or the idea that we should kind of allow the local decision makers to do as much as is plausible if you don't have high levels of knowledge and expertise. So you have to feed a system that is organized this way, with continually helping educators as well as parents and others become more knowledgeable about how to accomplish the goals. The accountability mechanisms that operate that we outline in the paper are political accountability. You can vote people out of office, and you can also, you have voice and opportunities to yammer at them and to influence them and leverage them through the local control accountability plans. Professional accountability, which gets activated through things like licensure and accreditation. We have a very robust agenda at the CTC overhauling licensure and accreditation and thinking ahead about how professional development can be strengthened, and the state as a whole needs to take up more and more of those issues. And then performance accountability is really expressed by the state's priority measures and other local priorities. Many of you are familiar with the 8 areas in which that multiple measures approach is being instantiated through looking at things like not only smarter balanced scores, but also English proficiency and a wide range of ways to look at college and career readiness, student engagement on many measures, school climate, parent involvement, basic services, which is a very important thing, that evidence of opportunities that students have to learn is coupled with outcome evidence. That's a really important piece to have on the dashboard together. Implementation of Common Core, that's what we've said we're about. Let's see how we're doing with that, and let's have people think about how to evidence that course access and other outcomes. You already saw the core district's accountability chart. I had already, I had decided to use it, not knowing that Rick would already have shown it, but you can never see it too many times, because it also expresses the local add-ons, if you will, that Rick already pointed out, that the core districts are going further to look at social emotional learning, and they have indicators of social emotional learning and school climate, to look further at things like persistence rates and so on. So you could see in action how the state priorities create a framework within which locals can both attend to those and think about other things that are particularly important in their context and create that sense of energy around those local goals. So it's a good example of the complements that ought to be operating in this system as it approaches. If you look at the way the accountability system is emerging, it does tell a different story about how we will get good schools, other than beyond the idea that we'll just have a lot of tests, sets, targets, and sanctions. It suggests that accountability is designed to produce continuous improvement, be reciprocal, that each level of the system is taking responsibility. We're getting clearer about what's the role of the state, what's the role of the district, what's the role of schools in that reciprocal system. Focusing on meaningful learning, we're moving towards more valid and authentic assessments, adequate resources, professional capacity, multiple measures, system capacity building, and student, parent, educator, and community input with transparency being one of the elements of accountability. It's a very different image than what we had under API and what evolved under AYP and where we're heading. So let's say we want to now build around this emerging system the elements of a continuously improving system. What would that require California to do? Well, one thing you need in a continuously improving system is a way for everyone to be learning, a way for educators to be continuously learning about how to meet the needs of their students and how to design more effective schools, a way for districts to be learning about how to run systems more effectively, a way for the state to be learning how to run its system more effectively, and a way to share all of that knowledge. Those kinds of learning supports ought to help people make better use of information systems. And so what's the information system going to look like that allows us both to inform what we do with our knowledge and to review schools and districts. So we need a process for ongoing review. Parts of that are in the LCAP or envisioned as flowing from the LCAP. We still have to invent how that review will be meaningful and authentic and important and actionable. We need a process innovation and evaluation. We need to know what's working and what's not working, and then we need knowledge sharing strategies so that we can tell people around the state what has worked and what hasn't worked. There's a lot of innovation that goes on in American schools and certainly in California schools, but we do a very poor job, generally speaking, of reaping the knowledge from that about what has happened, what has worked, where did it work, why did it work, how do we connect people so that they learn. The core districts are really trying to invent a way to share and disseminate knowledge among those districts. We need that same capacity in the state as a whole so that everyone's not out there trying to reinvent the wheel. Innovation is good, but if we don't learn from it, replicate it, spread it, et cetera, then we could innovate our way to failure because we start things and we stop things and we lose the benefits of what we've done. Organizing and reporting information for improvement is a key element of this continuous improvement system. We've already heard a lot of people talk about the benefits of moving from a single index to a dashboard of indicators. Obviously, it allows you to really figure out what's going on. I loved the point that was made earlier about the fact, I think Carrick made this point, that while the state may have some kind of a dashboard that just allows us to generally know where the, the giant car of the state is going, or maybe it's a freight train or something. At the local level, you need more real-time insight so that you're really addressing needs as they come up. So we have to keep, while the state collects data and can make it useful and available to local districts and to others, it can be transparent, which is part of accountability. We have to keep a very robust local role for the use of data that is going to inform actual improvement in schools. We have to keep the idea right in front of us. The most important thing on our line of vision is that improving schools is the goal, not just tracking data, allocating sanctions, setting targets. We've gotten so wound up with all of those accoutrements of what accountability might be that improving schools sometimes gets lost. And we've even seen cases where all of that has gotten in the way of improving schools because it didn't allow us to tackle the issues that really needed to be tackled. So one way to think about this, and this actually is a copy of what Rick Miller earlier referred to. This is kind of a California-ized version of the Alberta results report. And in Alberta, what they did many years ago is very similar to what we're trying to do now. And this is the Alberta that's in Canada, in case you're wondering what Alberta I'm talking about. They produce something other than good comedians. There seem to be a lot of comedians from Canada these days. So they have three big areas, and those actually map onto much of what we have. Learning opportunities, we're looking at basic services, implementation of state standards, the Common Core and others. School climate is a set of learning opportunities. They look at a variety, course access is another. They look at a variety of learning outcomes, pupil achievement on various kinds of assessments, pupil engagement, attendance, and so on. Other student outcomes, we'll be looking at college and career-ready indicators of various kinds. And they look at school and district responsiveness. And that's parental involvement and engagement and community involvement. And then they have a set of indicators very much like what the state priorities look like. And they keep track for those that have, and they also have local indicators. And you'll see this in many emerging state report cards. And the local indicators on the local report card will take up a lot of space as well because there are many things that they're measuring. Some of these can be some parts of a report like this, tracking how progress is moving, could be populated by the state. The data could go in for the local districts, and other parts of it would be populated by the local districts with their own data and their own goals and targets and so on. In the case of Alberta, this is online. You could go into any of the indicators and click on it and see the underlying data. And there are sort of other pages of the report that tell you what's going on. So you can get as much data or as little data as you want, and you can kind of see in their case with color coding, which areas are kind of moving well and which areas might be a flag to pay more attention to. But it kind of is one way of asking the question. There's been a concern with dashboards on the part of some people that, well, if you have all these measures, how will you know what the holistic picture is, or where to be worried, kind of where's the worry meter, or what to be worried about. And so you need some way of organizing the information so that you can see how things are looking and then focus in on the places that most need to be focused in on. Something like this we'll need to think about how to bring together all the data systems, and I know Carrick is thinking about this already and has already been moving this. We have right now, we still have the API, we have the SARC, we have an online data tool. If you go into the accountability website on the CDE, we have a different system for identifying schools for intervention, which is federally required. At some point, we need to figure out a way that the 8 priorities of the state and the local priorities inform and become a unifying approach for what are now a bunch of disparate systems, or districts and schools won't know what they should be responding to. They'll be trying to respond to a whole lot of different systems. And that's going to take some legislative cleanup because we have all of that geological dig of policies that David showed us at the beginning, which were a painful experience for some of us to relive as we watched his slides, as well as some invention about how to create the new approach. And then the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence is going to be a key player. This is the part that's kind of TBD, right? We have this idea that, and we do have now a sort of a board of overseers for this and a county that will be the place for the collaborative. The idea that the improvement is going to be orchestrated and supported and enabled through this collaborative. The collaborative could do all of those things that I mentioned earlier, or some of them, but it must do 2. It must diagnose the needs of schools and districts that volunteer or are referred for help by counties or charter school agencies. And it must figure out how to provide some kind of effective assistance to those schools and districts that have not been able to be effectively assisted by counties or charter school agencies. And then I would argue that it would be great if the CCEE would be thinking with other agencies like the CDE, the state board, the counties, et cetera, about how we will create amongst those players with some perhaps orchestrating, conducting role from the CCEE, a knowledge sharing capacity, a way to orchestrate learning support so they're always available to schools and districts when they reach out for them and need them, and a way to both promote and report evaluation results that will help us learn as a state what are the best bets, where to put our eggs, how to move forward on improvement. One part of that process for diagnostics could be a form of a school quality review. California actually dabbled in this some years ago. New York, Rhode Island, Chicago, some other places developed a form of a diagnostic review, building on the work of Her Majesty's inspectors from England. Actually, one of them got loose and got over here. His name is David Green, and he traveled around and worked with people on how to take the kind of a democratic American impulse to have peers come into schools and look at them as we do with accreditation, with the British impulse to have one right answer. And so the inspector has a lot of expertise in going into schools and kind of saying what's working and what's not, and combining it with robust data to really provide a much more high leverage, purposeful approach to coming into schools, looking at teaching and learning, looking at their goals, looking at their data, looking at student work, looking at classrooms, and being able to say, here's what we see in relation to your goals, and here's what could move the school forward. We did this in New York State when I was there as the chair of the Curriculum and Assessment Council, and schools came to really value and treasure the school quality review. It took them further than accreditation. One might imagine a system in which we even partner with accrediting agencies, bring this expertise and data to bear with the peer review so that when a school is struggling or wants to improve and wants help in that process, we have much more than here's a piece of data, we're sending you a date or a SATE team that has a template for a set of activities that you will undertake whether you need them or not. In fact, that the review would produce both internal learning and external advice and counsel. We need to develop improvement strategies. I hope we look at the core districts and some of what they're doing as we think about what states and counties, what the CCEE and the counties might do, because they have begun, for example, doing these school pairings, which schools in Shanghai also do, pairing schools that are succeeding on a particular kind of problem with similar kids to a school that's struggling with that same problem. And schools are finding that extremely valuable. Networks for learning among schools and districts may be another strategy. In England, Australia, Ontario, those have been very productive in terms of helping schools improve. Teams of expert educators, distinguished educators who are trained to work with struggling schools. It's been very effective in Kentucky and North Carolina. We can look at a lot of different models. Curriculum coaches have been a major strategy for implementing new standards and curriculum frameworks in several other countries. That may also factor in. School redesign initiatives may be needed in some cases. We could perhaps develop a capacity to base those on research and best practices. The CCEE and the counties will work this out. I think there's a consensus that we want to look at what other places have been doing that has been effective. And finally, one last piece of advice for the new CCEE. David and I thought some organizational design principles might be useful. One is the principle of professionalism, that it will be important to have expertise, to have a deeply expert professional staff that can review these intervention strategies, can oversee the technical assistance activities, people who know and have experience in transforming schools and districts, people who are able to perform that role of the inspector in a school quality review and know what to look for and look at to give schools advice about change. A second important parameter for the CCEE will be a partnership framework. We have a lot of capacity in the state. It's a big state. It's not always very well orchestrated. This is a possible role for the CCEE. There are both evaluation centers in different universities around the states. There are professional development organizers and organizations that can be tapped. Building on the highest quality work that's available in partnership will be important because this will be a small agency. And I don't think the state is going to want to grow it to become a giant enterprise, but it can effectively partner. And finally, it should think about what kinds of strategies could be scalable so that it can respond to expectations and what we think will be a growing demand for assistance over time, because a lot of districts will raise their hand and say, well, nobody's told me that I need to come get help, but I want help. And I think in a continuous improvement system, that ability to scale the work will be extremely important as well. If we are successful in taking all of the energy that has been emerging in the last couple of years in California and unifying it into a long-term strategy, we think there's a good chance we could move from a compliance-oriented system to a system that is capable of system learning and continuous improvement. Thank you.